Good afternoon, aloha. My name is Robert Harris. I'm the Vice Chair of the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct, and I am not conducting a coup, but for purposes of one meeting, I'll be running or chairing this meeting. Also joined by, actually, can I ask the Commission members to go ahead and introduce themselves briefly?
Dan Foley, Chair.
Kristen Izumi Nitao, Executive Director, Campaign Spending Commission.
Sandy Flo, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sandy Ma, Executive Director, Common Cause Hawaii.
And Flo Nakakuni, former U.S. Attorney for the District of Hawaii.
Thank you. The intent of this meeting is largely a procedural one, with the intent of trying to schedule future meetings and to try to more broadly solicit public input. The first item on the agenda is to request public input. I don't believe that there are any members of the public here, but let me just pause quickly to see if there's anybody in the public who wishes to speak. Great. I think probably at the beginning of every meeting, giving the public an opportunity to speak is probably a good policy moving forward. And we might even think about ways to try to actively solicit comments, et cetera, going forward to just like a press release or something asking for input. The next item on the agenda is moving on to update of the current status of bills before the legislature.
Excuse me, sorry, Robert.
Go ahead.
Vice Chair. I do want to note for the public that we did receive written testimony from Jim Sean. I just wanted to note that for the public and for anyone who may be watching later, that Jim Sean did send in some written suggestions for the commission. And so we did receive that, and it was circulated to every commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Ma. I think we can also upload, and maybe it'd be worthwhile to confirm with Jim Sean, we can upload it and make it available, I think, on the legislative website to be able to show a record of everything that's been submitted. We can do that on a going forward basis.
Thank you.
Before I move on to the next item on the agenda, I see that we have one additional person who's joined us, Trisha Kajimura. I don't know if that is somebody who would want to give public input.
Aloha, no, I didn't submit anything. I was just going to observe.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for joining. Okay, so just briefly on, and again, I want to give each commissioner the opportunity if there's a particular bill that they want to give an update on. I did want to just highlight three of the bills I think during our discussions we had maybe focused on a fair amount of time, which includes SB 2930, which is the funding of a Attorney General Special Investigation and Prosecution Unit. It's my understanding that that bill has been deferred, but the funding is being proposed to be moved into the budget directly. In addition, SB 555, which prohibits fundraisers during session. There is a House bill version which would prohibit elected officials from holding a fundraiser during a regular or special session. The definition of elected official includes a governor, a lieutenant governor, a member of OHA, county mayors, county council, prosecutor's office. So a bit broader than I think discussed before, and that is moving to conference committee. And finally, maybe a bit of a personal bill pushing HB 1475, the mandatory ethics training is in conference committee. Is there any other bill that folks want to highlight? Again, I think the intent of not necessarily needing to read through each one because our report, all the bills are there, and it's easy to look them up. There's any particular question, but there's one folks want to highlight or discuss. Just want to give that chance. Kristen, sorry, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I think I just want to make a note that of the bills that were mentioned in the interim report, we do have one, which is House Bill 1427, House Draft 1, that I just want to let you know is on the governor's desk. So for approval. And that one just had to do with if you described that if which candidates would have to file the preliminary general. And essentially they would not have to if they were unsuccessful or if they won outright in the primary, or unsuccessful in the primary or won outright in the primary, would not have to file the preliminary general report. So I just wanted to report that that's already before the governor. So yeah.
That was at Act 3 already.
Oh, is it?
I was just checking. So I
Is
don't,
it? Oh, I don't even know that. Okay. You have, wonderful.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks. Are there any other bills folks would like to ask about or inquire about or talk about?
I'd just like to make one observation on Senate Bill 555, primarily for our one member of the public who's watching. But the commission makes recommendations in its interim report, but individuals are free to speak on a bill on behalf of their organization or themselves. And sometimes, as in this bill, it won't be exactly the same. But the commission doesn't take that as a slight, but that will happen from time to time.
I should also note, to the extent that we're talking about SB 555, during the conference committee hearing, the House chair mentioned that they thought that there is a problem with the title of the bill as far as being able to expand it to prohibiting donations. And so I think that suggestion from the commission was heard and discussed, but I think there was a belief that SB 55 in its current form couldn't be expanded to address that issue.
And I can just add to that. I think that Robert, you having said that, I think that for purposes of the final report, we can continue the discussion for purposes of recommendation should, the commission or the public feel that it's appropriate.
Any other bills before we move on? Okay, so moving on to scheduling of future meetings. Just to highlight, December seems like a long time away, but assuming we were to start meeting in June and we're to meet twice, every 2 weeks, let's say, just for the sake of discussion, it means that we'd have 14 meetings before a final report would be due. And assuming 1 or 2 of those meetings might be involved in sort of the finalization of the draft, the number of meetings that we'd have to be able to substantively dive into any particular topic is relatively, we will be in December before we know it. And so I think the idea of trying to schedule the meetings, and forgive me if it seems like it's being limiting or overly directive, I think the intent is just trying to say, rather than try to talk about a plethora of topics at each meeting and sort of get, lost in it, it might be worthwhile to try to focus a meeting on a particular area. So I'll just pick something along the lines of, say, elections, invite, several guest speakers, including representatives of the Office of Elections, for example, and try to set a few topics for discussion with the idea of coming out of that meeting with sort of a next steps or sort of directions that we want to go in. That might be followed up later, but the idea is that we sort of had a good, hearty, substantive discussion, gotten public input, and sort of try to tag key folks to come in to talk about that area. And so, the idea might be is to set a date, say a Thursday at 2 or whatever it might be, and just make that reoccurring. So the idea, we can try to make sure we have a facility and that we have notice that that's when we're meeting, and set 4 or 5 topics in a row. With the idea at the end, 4 or 5 topics, we can see if that format's working well, and continue that process or try to do something different. But the hope would be is set 4 or 5 meetings going forward from now and set the date, set the time, and sort of have that held in place. And we can do some level of public outreach to kind of let people know this is what we're doing and how we're doing it. Let me pause there. Well, I guess the other final thing before I pause, I think the intent would be is to try to have a facilitator for each meeting. The idea that person would help do the invitation to speakers, do the help in starting to draft the agenda. But then before the agenda is finalized, would bring it back to the commission for input to make sure that the right folks are invited and sort of make sure there's sort of buy-in from everybody on that as a procedural matter. With that, let me pause and see if anybody has any input on sort of this idea.
Robert, I like the idea of setting a meeting date first, whether it's going to be every other Thursday, just so we get that nailed down. We seem to be having meetings on Thursdays, so that would work for me.
And this would begin after the session, right?
I think that's the intent, yes.
I'm sorry, so would this start in June then?
What date does the session end?
May 5th.
May 5th. So we theoretically can start it in mid-May. Let me go ahead and throw out then, just as a proposal, what do folks think about trying to start on May 19th at 2 p.m. and then make it every 2 weeks thereafter?
I'm not here on May 19th, but I realize we're going to have that type of conflict. So,
Well, one thing we can do, if Robert doesn't mind working on this, and he put in his email, and I agree, if we can kind of sketch out our next 5 meetings, dates, subject, and facilitator, and then he can circulate it around, and maybe the dates, if need be, can be moved, especially if the facilitator is not available. We also don't have Janet or Barbara here today. So.
I think
I most likely will not be here on the 19th either, to take some time off after session.
What
So
would you
if we-
suggest then, Sandy?
I'm sorry.
What would you suggest if not the 19th?
That's totally fine to have a meeting without me.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Robert. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. I was going to ask a similar question. What if we moved it a week later, the 26th?
Okay, well, I'm going to be out of town.
Would starting in June make a significant difference? Otherwise, I'd suggest we just start picking the Thursday and just start scheduling it, recognizing some folks are going to fall out. If we did it on June 2nd, would it make a difference?
I'll be here on June 2nd.
I'll be here.
Just to be the problematic one now, I'm actually leaving the afternoon of June 2nd. So,
Because
but again,
what are you thinking of a specific time? Like, as Flo mentioned, we've been meeting like in the afternoon. So are we thinking afternoons too? So are you thinking mornings?
So I think we're going to keep stumbling around this. Again, I think it's perfectly fine to stay in the afternoons. I think it's perfectly fine to stay on Thursdays. I think we'll stumble around trying to find the perfect first date. Maybe it might be easier to just go ahead and talk about a couple different topics, and then a facilitator, and then sort of just try to make sure that facilitator is available. So if we have a hot topic that we need to talk about right away, make sure that first day lands in a way that facilitator will be there. If not, in the alternative, what do folks think about June 1st, Wednesday? And we can do Wednesdays.
I'm okay with that.
Either one, it's fine with me.
All right. So why don't we tentatively say June 1st from 2 to 4 or 2 to 4:30?
Right.
And then we can have our June 15th. So the same, and just keep going from there, Wednesday 2 to 4:30. silence means assent, so I'm going to go ahead and assume that that's okay for these discussion purposes. Obviously, we can move any individual meeting if we need to.
So Robert, you're now looking at Wednesdays then. So you're starting the 1st of June is a Wednesday. Okay, and then the next one will be June 15th, 2 to 4:30, or are you going back to Thursdays?
For the sake of discussion, I'm going ahead and saying Wednesday, June 15th, then Wednesday, June 29th, and
Got
so
it.
on.
So forth. Okay. Well, I will just make a comment, Robert, that you and I usually will have sunshine meetings on a Wednesday. So Wednesdays, you know what I mean, is one of those days that we can figure it out later, but I'm just throwing it out since.
And we're all going to have things. I have a mediation that day, but I think I'll be finished by 2. So we're all going to have stuff.
Okay.
Inevitable.
You and I, Kristen, will already be dressed up for the meeting. Welcome. Just so for the record, we have Janet joining us and Barbara Morimoto.
Oh,
Welcome. So we do, just to catch up, we proposed our first meeting to be on Wednesday, June 1st from 2 to 4:30, and then just for the sake of discussion, every 2 weeks thereafter at the same time, and we can move individual meetings as need be. Okay. So does somebody want to take a stab at proposing one of the topics that they think should be discussed?
Are we not following the topics of our interim report?
We absolutely are, Sandy. So if you want to propose one of those topics on the interim report that you think we should try to talk about in more detail. So for example, in the interim report, we listed taking the very first topic, increased criminal penalties and investigative tools for state and county law enforcement to address fraud and public corruption. So if that were the first topic that we were to take on, the idea to be able to say, we think, here are some of the speakers they might think about doing, or I'd be interested in leading that topic for the purpose of discussion. So that's sort of what I'm looking for at this stage, is to say, let's break off that topic and talk about it, to say if we're going to set aside a day for it, what would it look like?
okay. So, what I'm doing is Robert, I was looking at an email we got from you, and it does have, as an example, June 29th, criminal fraud flow to lead. But that was a date that Barbara Morimoto told me she's very much interested in that topic. She's not going to be here. So I'd like another date. I don't want an earlier date, only because I guess this is my question. If there's going to be just one meeting devoted to that issue, then there are any number of persons who I think this commission might want to hear from. And so I would want to give them as much notice as possible, because if I give them, everybody's busy, of course, but if I just give them 4 weeks notice, the chances are good that most of them will not be able to make that particular date. So I was thinking, for me, I'd like a date in July, especially if, these are people who do not usually appear at these kinds of meetings. And I'd want to give them some time.
How about July 6th?
Okay, but I guess my first question is, am I correct on that for these topics, we'll have one meeting devoted to that topic, that's it?
No, so again, we have 14 meetings, assuming we follow the schedule. So we're starting in May, maybe we have 16 meetings total. We already have in the magnitude of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 topics. So I'm just trying to give so I don't think there's any intent to say you get one meeting, that's it. My hope would be is that we'd come out of the meeting with a pretty good consensus of what needs to be worked on. And there may be some of these, if we schedule the first 4 or 5 meetings, We might schedule one to be a catch-up meeting to try to catch up on some of the loose ends. We might schedule another meeting because it was such a contentious or we needed more discussion. But we also have to start thinking about these other topics. When do we squeeze them in? So again, my goal was to try to schedule 4 or 5 of these next topics, try to see how we're going through them and sort of see where we're at and check in. So let's just say hypothetically you came in. I mean, a part of this would be is not just bringing in speakers and having a wide open discussion. It might be with sort of proposing a couple interim solutions for discussion with the idea that we're going to walk out saying we really want to try to chase down that solution. And so, you know, the hope would be the meeting would be fairly action oriented with the idea we need to try to develop something for a final report.
Sorry, Mike. Flo, go ahead and schedule it at your convenience. I might be able to Zoom in or conference call.
Robert had suggested a date in July. That's fine with me.
He said July 6th. I'll still be gone. I won't be back till July 11th. So go ahead and schedule it when it's convenient to you.
So we proposed every second Wednesday. So the next Wednesday would be July 20th. And we can make that sort of on the outer reaches of what we're scheduling right now. Would that be acceptable?
That's fine with me. Barbara, you'll be here, right?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
But you know, I'm interested in every topic, so it's okay. Go ahead.
Kristen, I think you're on mute.
I was just going to say, I think I have July 13th and July 27th, not the 20th. If you do every 2 weeks.
You're right. I apologize.
Okay. So maybe make it July 27th for Flo.
I think that's scheduling pretty far out. I do want to be cautious about scheduling too far out with the idea that this pattern isn't working well. I don't want us to sort of get stuck and trapped into it. How about July 13th?
13th. Barbara, you're back, right?
Yes, I am back.
Okay. July 13th at 2 o'clock.
Works.
So Flo, who would you think about inviting and sort of, I mean, again, this doesn't have to be resolved with definitiveness right now, but
certainly somebody from the AG's office. The one person that I talked to before very briefly was Gary Yamashiraya. I think his title might be Special Assistant to the AG. I would like to invite someone from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Claire Connors was the AG. Larry Tong is a first assistant in the U.S. Attorney's Office. He was Special Assistant to Claire when she was there. And if there's time, you know, it would be in addition to the AG's offices, the county prosecutors would also be able to prosecute these kinds of cases. So let me think about that. But those are also individuals who may have ideas going forward as to what they would like to see in this area. New laws, perhaps, is what I'm thinking they'd say.
Flo, do you think it would be too unwieldy, or would you also consider inviting former AGs like Doug Chin, Marjorie Bronster, David Louie, or does that get it too big?
Well, that might be, well, you know what, let me think about that. But if we have the entire meeting and we can get them focused, that might be possible. I'm sure folks like Marjorie Bronster and Doug Chin and David Louie would be happy to speak for 10 minutes.
They're always happy to speak.
You know, with so many stellar people that we might want to have in, you might want to do an all-day session and break it up with lunch or something. Yeah. But or have it in 1 or 2 days, just so you have the critical mass. But having it separated by 2 weeks and intervals, it just might not be as helpful. You know, you might want them to talk to each other too.
So Barbara, are you talking about maybe trying to do multiple topics over 2 days? Or just this topic?
This particular topic with so many people who might be invited to talk, you might want to just have a talk session, a among themselves.
I think the challenge, and again, I guess maybe playing devil's advocate, if this is okay, is that every topic we can do 2 or 3 days on. I mean, term limits, we could spend a week discussing and invite a ton of different speakers. And so I think I sort of want to encourage, trying to be as ruthlessly efficient as we can. And so I think maybe one of the questions would be, and I think we missed Mark Bennett, who actually has a criminal background in that list. Former criminal in background. Maybe even trying to reach out to them and say specifically, is there specific solutions or specific things? Because they can all come talk and that's great. But I think the idea would be is, are they coming to sort of the table with, hey, here's the 3 things that we really need to do. And then try to get a check on that.
Yeah. But just going 2 hours one day and then 2 hours in 2 weeks hence doesn't seem to, I don't know, it doesn't make that much sense to me.
Well, one of the things Robert mentioned earlier, Barbara, we can always go back to it. Just because we discussed a topic for one session doesn't mean we're finished with it or with those that appear.
Or just make it a longer session. I mean, I think that this is a really important part of what we're doing. And I think it's really resonated with the public and it's a new uncharted territory. So I think it deserves, I'd agree with the comments, and let Flo put it together and see what comes out, and as far as try to budget some time for it, that could get a good discussion and go from there. So we're working from 2 to 4:30, but if Flo feels, and given the scheduling of these kinds of people, maybe it deserves something that's a longer time allotment, just because I think it's uncharted territory and I think it's received a lot of positive input. So, and I think the public will have a lot of input on it too. That's just my thought.
Well, let me do this because, we're talking about a specific date. So let me reach out to these various individuals because scheduling might dictate that it's going to be a far smaller group than we think. But I have all my notes here. So the names I mentioned, in addition, the former state attorney generals, to include Mark Bennett, whose name I inadvertently omitted earlier.
I intentionally omitted him. I don't know if he'll speak as a sitting federal judge. So,
you know what? He probably won't, but I'll call him anyway.
Okay.
And again, I will reiterate, I might be able to conference call in, so please disregard my request for an earlier date.
Barbara, this is fine. You know why? Because it gives these folks enough notice, since we're asking such a big group.
I think it's great, and I fully agree. Like, we should give it the time it needs. And so trying to do something really fast for 2 hours and then break and then lose it is not worthwhile either. But I would encourage trying to think of ways to try to make it more efficient. So some of these folks might, for example, come on together as more of like a panel discussion. Might be more, useful rather than have them each give like carefully prepared notes, and then, just trying to think of ways to try to make it as efficient as possible would be useful.
Yeah. I was thinking that you need the buy-in from the county people, and if they were invited to participate, it would facilitate passage of legislation.
All right, Barbara. I mean, my thinking was for sure invite the prosecuting attorneys for all counties. Whether they can come or will come, I don't know.
Is it okay? I'll leave that question alone. Do we have any further sort of input from the collective group on folks to invite or things to talk about or specific things that should be on the agenda for this meeting?
I'd like to ask Sandy something, whether she wants to take the initiative on it. When you submitted your list for proposed topics, you talked about legislature rules. And again, the House resolution directs us to look at, sort of best practices. And we also have Barbara Maramoto as a former legislator. Is that something, Sandy, you and Barbara could put together with your interest? Because, you know, most of what we're going to be recommending are bills, but we're also going to be considering some possible rule changes. What are your thoughts on that, Sandy?
Actually, Chair, before we jump into that, do you mind just wrapping up with Flo's one? Is there any other input on that? I think the idea here is, to the extent that we're kind of blessing Flo as facilitator to go schedule, is to, you know, make sure she's gotten some input. So, you know, she sort of heard that. So is there anybody else who wants to sort of suggesting, but anyone else who should speak, or any other specific solutions?
I just want a clarification that it is July 27th from 2 to 4:30. That's the panel. No, that's not the date.
No, we proposed July 13th. Thanks for that.
That's
Thanks for
okay.
that clarification.
It's
Flo, is that still good? July 13th, okay?
Yes, yes.
Barbara will be back for that as well. So
Thank you.
I guess I would just throw out there, just so I'm on the same page, for purposes of content of what this July panel would bring to the table with through Flo, is to discuss, like we've sort of discussed before, increasing investigative tools and crimes, you know, as far as criminal offenses, yeah, and penalties. So just so that the scope is something that we're all on board with as far as expectations, and that can be relayed through the minutes. So at least the public is aware of what's sort of being formed, assuming we can get the people at the table through Flo on July 13th. That would be the content. That'd be the topic takeaway.
I think, Flo, also to set it up, I mean, we have several criminal, I think we discussed before, criminal statutes on the books, but I think, you know, essentially little or no prosecutions of those crimes. And I think, you know, maybe as a setup question is why, and what do we need to do to change that?
I know what they'll say. They'll say that the state statutes don't have teeth. You need statutes more like the federal statutes, things that we've been discussing for a while now.
I mean, the hope is that if, for example, we are the ones who are going to have to start drafting the statutory changes, what do they need to be? I mean, like, you know, or is there model statutes that they can point to? And hopefully the speakers are sort of primed to come in with those kind of more solid recommendations.
Right.
I don't think, relatively speaking, this is contentious in the, like, you know, lots of people are going to disagree. I think this is more in the, like, what do you need? How do we get there? Kind of.
Oh, I think so. I think so.
So, Chair, you had asked about specific rules, changes to the rules, House and Senate rules, and I think that's probably a good topic in of itself. But I mean, I guess I'd also flag it's also more of like a procedural. How do we get there? So some of the ethics recommendations, for example, that we might have might include revising the House and Senate rules as a solution to kind of an ethic issue. And so maybe I'd sort of frame it. Do we want to have a discussion topic just in House and Senate rules? Or do we want to encourage people in sort of the individual topic areas to think about what could be reflected in the House and Senate rules that would be beneficial?
The only thought I have on that, and maybe we can not schedule that today, but maybe later after these other issues. But, you know, there's certain issues that are obvious, more transparency, more openness, more public participation, and what are other legislators doing? You know, doing some research. But I'll leave that for a later day.
So maybe that's one on like the legislative process specifically, about what can be done in legislative process. So for example, like should session be a little bit longer in order to be able to have more public notice and opportunity to testify, for example? You know, there's a 60-day limit, but they can schedule more breaks and sort of essentially make the entire session longer, with the idea that then you can give more notice and sort of have more opportunity for public participation. So I mean, the idea is the topic might be the legislative process rather than the rules, but just how to improve the process itself. So I'm trying to reflect back. Is that a good, maybe a recasting of that topic?
Well, ultimately, we're going to have to draft bills and rules or some administrative action, as you suggested in the interim report. Well, why don't we kick that down to later and deal with more substantive issues?
Yeah, I'm very interested in the House rules too. I see where it could lead to a degree of corruption, but it's kind of getting into the weeds as far as the public is concerned. I think there'll be a lot of pushback from legislators. We've been talking about House rules. We haven't even looked at Senate rules. I've never seen the Senate rules. But I think of general interest to the public is election laws. There's talk about top two primary, jungle primary, rank voting, term limits. I think those are of great interest to the public.
I agree. And I think it is something that is very current. We have an election coming up, and it would be timely to have something about this perhaps in June or July before the primary.
Ballots drop July, so it may not be, it may look like a conflict of interest, or it may be problematic because ballots drop July 26th. It hits mailboxes July 26th, so it may be an issue if we try to insert ourselves in the voting process at that time.
Yeah, but we could do something in June, I think. These topics are, well underway. I mean, there's a bill for both ranked choice voting, and there's another one for faithless electors.
I think that one died, Janet.
What?
I think faithless electors may have died.
It may have died. I'm just saying the new voting modernization ideas are not limited to Hawaii. I know Common Cause probably works on it too, but League has many national resources that could help with this. So I don't think it would be a problem to have it in late June.
I think the only, I fully agree that this is definitely a topic the public's interested in, and it's definitely one we do need to address. I wonder if like the office elections like in July might be pretty tied up or busy. So just more from a scheduling purpose, June maybe is available. Would we have a volunteer to help facilitate that meeting? And then maybe we can talk briefly about what we should try to do in that meeting.
So are you asking for topics on the different voting systems like ranked choice voting? Or are you asking for a primer on how our voting system is in Hawaii? So
we have two topics that are listed in our interim report. One is election reform, including ranked choice voting and top two primaries. We also have public funding of elections. And so I can see trying to invite, whether it's League, whether it's Common Cause, I think we have to have the State Office of Elections participate just from a pragmatic, what can they do or not do? What do they need? Again, I'm sort of jumping ahead, but the topic might be sort of a discussion of that with the idea of trying to move towards a proposal coming out of that and why that would be beneficial.
So public finance is more, Kristen, talking with Kristen, and, we've had proposals on public financing as well, like small dollar matching, democracy dollars around the country. But that's really, talking with Kristen and working with Kristen on proposals for public financing of elections. But
we should add voter education to that list. It isn't something we've specifically talked about, but it's very important, and it has a great deal to do with the work of this commission. And I do think the Office of Elections has a genuine interest in this. It's just that their wings have been clipped as far as how much they can do.
But public financing is separate from the election.
Right, I agree.
So if I can propose, it sounds like we all agree elections needs to be a topic. So if we can maybe shoot for a date and then just get a couple people, or I don't know, one of us to facilitate that. I'm happy to help, but I think the ranked choice stuff is more your area, Sandy. So you know what I mean? Unless you want to take this piece.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about ranked choice voting. And I'm happy to have national folks come and talk about other voting issues. You know, we have a lot of great voting reforms here already. Same day, online, vote by mail. The dogs approve as well. So yeah. AVR. So,
Sandy,
yeah.
has there been anybody who has been opposed to ranked choice voting or something else of that nature that might be useful to have represented? And again, I'm not trying to say we have to strive perfect balance, but the idea is just to understand what obstacles need to be addressed.
In Hawaii, the Republican Party has voted in bloc against ranked choice voting, and Office of Elections has not weighed in on the issue at all for the current ranked choice voting bill that's going to conference, SB 2162. And so it's a very narrow bill. So yeah, but they haven't weighed in at all.
Are there, so let's just assume we were doing something focused on ranked choice voting, and would we want to do voter education in the same discussion? Yes,
we would. Just voter education in general and voter education around ranked choice voting as well. I'm happy to work with Janet on that issue, you know, because we're both very involved in that. And just even education around vote by mail, because there's so much misinformation and disinformation about vote by mail.
Sandy, I don't know what your schedule is like, but I have a preference for June 15th.
June 15th is good for me.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
I would think that going along with those topics, you have to also discuss the top two primary and the jungle that was brought up by Charles Dejoux.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So generally speaking, election reform, capturing those different proposals, and then voter education.
Yes.
So the facilitator on this one is going to be Sandy and Janet.
So
we're fine unless other people object or want to join our party.
So I think I really appreciate you guys taking this on, and I think it's really an opportunity to try to get sort of some different background information to be able to bring different people. I think one of the things I did flag it early on, and this would apply to all of us, is that we try to like get a draft agenda circulated for the commission, just to be able to take a look at sort of like, here's speakers that we propose, or here's how we are thinking about breaking up, just to try to get input early on. Does that sound fair, reasonable?
Sure. Sure.
So I have RCV, top two, jungle primary, voter education. Those are our 4 top issues, and of course, inviting people from the Office of Elections and our county elections divisions.
And I'm to understand we really don't vote on any of these, whether we accept them for the final report until like November, early November. We won't do it as we hear them, but we will wait until after all the hearings are over. That's what I would suggest anyway.
So I think it may depend, Barbara, on sort of how much additional work is needed on it. Let's just say hypothetically, we come out of the meeting and there's a decision that we would suggest a direction in one of these things. You know, I could see sort of to the extent that we need to start working on draft bills, it might be worthwhile for us to vote on it early. There may be some topics that require more research or more development based on the questions that we just can't do. But I think it would be helpful at the end to try to do some level of voting or even just assessment of directionality. Is this the right direction to be going in before someone does some substantive work around trying to draft a bill or something?
Mhm.
Right, because we can't wait till November to start drafting bills necessarily.
Okay. But, okay, well,
So
I just thought that we should.
let's
And some things, you know, you just might want to get more input on and take time to think. So,
Of course, yeah. I mean, I don't think the intent here is to force anything, but let's just say on the if we have recommendations from the AG's office, U.S. Attorney's and County Prosecutor's office on July 13th, of here's the specific changes are needed for the current existing criminal law, and here's things, and we get really specifics coming out of that. Why not have at least in general an agreement that that's something that we want to pursue, and sort of now start moving towards actually drafting and try to get some type of assessment concurrent to the commission.
that
Not to say
would,
that.
that would make
So the
sense.
idea is,
Makes
so the
you
idea is
confident,
November.
then you would maybe not want to vote on it. Start on
Yeah.
work.
So I mean, the idea would be is in November, December, you'd still be able to vote on the final bill or the final language, but the idea is, we can get a general direction.
Okay. That's a workable
Okay.
solution.
you.
If I can propose, I'll take campaign finance. We'll take, if we can take June 29th, because June 1st, I think we're going to be doing training most of the day. And I definitely want, I'm sure public funding will be one of the topics. And I definitely want my associate director present, who is very familiar with all the public funding programs and the full public funding programs, which we had done for the Hawaii County Council. So at least you'll have some, expertise there too. But I'd be very interested to know from this group what you'd like to hear in addition, maybe to some of the suggestions that I had made that made the list in the interim report. So I can prepare that meeting, if that's okay with you to take that date.
Kristen, I would be very interested to learn about other localities that have had a good take-up rate with a public financing program.
So we just heard that Oakland is going to be adopted. Oakland's public financing is introduced to public financing small dollar donation matching program. And of course, Seattle's small dollar donation is very successful. Santa Fe's is very successful. And I'm always concerned about funding, like how do you appropriately fund it?
Yeah.
Other places, do it by the property tax rate. And of course, we can't do that here at the state level because it's
Arizona has one too. So I Janet, maybe we just need to flesh it out further, because while I can appreciate the idea that there's other jurisdictions that have public funding, it's just not viable here. And it's sort of cart before the horse. We don't have that kind of money. But what I can offer at least is what's already on the table, which is partial public funding.
Right.
I know it's not full, but at least it's a solution.
Right.
One step in that direction. But I'm happy to have the larger question. Again, public funding is a huge area. So we'll just have to, work a little bit more on the right type of presentation that will be, as Robert said, concise,
Right. I should have been more specific. I was really referring to the partial public funding. Even partial public funding, the take-up rate hasn't always been great,
Yeah.
So.
I know a couple of years ago, we introduced, increasing the partial public funding dollars because it hasn't been raised since 1995. So I could probably explain why the take-up rate is so low, because it's such a small amount, so it really only, is worth it for, small races on neighbor islands. Kristen, if there are national resources you like to tap, like Campaign Legal Center, we'd be happy.
Sure. Yeah. And definitely, Sandy, I think it might be good to tap into some resource like that who can, like pull the information and be one person versus like 5 people, you know what I mean? And go into en masse with their PowerPoint on their presentation on how that works, because we can't. So yeah, we can talk more about public funding, but are there other topics that you guys you think we should talk about under campaign finance?
Oh, of course. Gosh, the endless things of, dark, dark money donations and how to trace back and, and things like that. You know my list, Kristen.
Kristen, if there are recaps or stories of candidates who voluntarily agreed to limit their expenditures, such as happened in Massachusetts, I know, with Elizabeth Warren, I find that inspirational. And what did it take to get that going?
Right now, our current program is that if you agree to an expenditure limit, your nomination paper filing fee is reduced. That's about it.
Okay.
So I don't know how inspirational that is, but that's our current system. Well, anyway, I have time, but I'm happy to as I put it together to meet the other areas that you might want to discuss. But I think you all have, seen the areas that I've proposed to in the area of campaign finance. So I'll, address those.
Yeah, we support increasing penalties, against super PACs, for violations. So I think that failed again.
I think it's going to conference.
Is it going to conference? Well, at least that's something. So,
Yeah.
But things like that, our wish list.
So thank you, Kristen. I think it would be helpful, and sorry, maybe I should try to cover this before, but I want to throw out there from a buy-in perspective. Do you think it'd be possible to circulate a draft agenda, even, at least 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time, with the idea that if we're inviting speakers, if there's, the sooner we can sort of say, yeah, all those speakers sound great, I think the better off we are. If they're just talked about here, for example, then I think we probably have consensus to go ahead and start fighting and trying to coordinate. But I think if you want to bring somebody else in, there may be some level of just trying to get buy-in on the agenda as soon as possible. And then I guess as I'm talking out loud, I realize I'm sort of changing my mind, but at least 2 to 3 weeks ahead of the date to try to make sure we've had a draft agenda circulated.
What do you mean by circulation? What do you?
So I think as a procedural matter, circulate to the commission for review and hopefully approval.
Yeah. Okay.
To go back to the last subject of election reform, also mentioned by Charles Dejoux was eliminating corporate and union political contributions. And let's see. No campaign. Monthly campaign reporting for committees that raise or spend more than $100,000. So just the corporate level donations are not allowable on the federal level. Union donations are allowable state and local and federal. Would there be any interest in considering them in election reform? So, but if someone spoke about it, then there would there wouldn't be a problem. Is that correct? Do they have to limit themselves to the topics listed? Want to cross that bridge later?
Barbara, I'm not
So-
sure what you mean. Can you explain a little more? You mean, is it okay for them to bring it up or?
Okay, we got Charles DeJue's civil beat remarks, and we are considering his jungle primary in election reform, which was, a top two primary, and was the term limits was part of the election reform. But he also suggested that we eliminate corporate and union political contributions. Also, monthly campaign spending reporting for big committees that have a lot of money. Do we bar him from talking about them, or if he does show up to testify, can he mention them?
I think so.
Of course.
Absolutely. But I think he would be, I think that would come to my area rather than elect that. So it would come to meeting number on my June 29th date in contrast to the June 15th date. So you might have to have 2 appearances.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank
So
you.
it has to be parceled, but I think absolutely.
Okay. And then
So
toward the end, the House rule changes or the Legislature rules changes was Jim Sean, and Jean Ward.
Yeah, I don't think we got to that. We haven't scheduled that one yet. I don't think.
Yeah, toward the end. That's toward the end.
But I think
Okay.
that's good. We should.
Okay.
But that still leaves at least ethics and of course the sunshine OIP stuff. So maybe we can schedule those 2.
July, August.
So we are trying to avoid going into August right now if we can, just because if we, for example, after Kristen's wonderful discussion, decided we need to have another follow-up meeting or something, the idea is we're not completely scheduled all the way out till December. So hopefully try to schedule these things sooner. And if we have to do follow-ups or a repeat meeting, we can. So happy, for the sake of argument, do you want to go ahead and start talking about the ethics one? Hearing no disagreement. So we have already scheduled the So let me maybe just before hitting a date, I think there are a number of concepts that maybe in of themselves may not be terribly controversial, but it's going to be just some level of then going ahead and drafting it. So for example, putting a gift regulation requirement on lobbyists. Right now it's only on state employees. So sort of making a reciprocal prohibition. So lobbyists themselves couldn't give the gift, nor could the state employee accept it. There's probably some level of research that's needed to be done just to try to make sure that any future bill is drafted in a way that we don't hit constitutional issues. So like, to some extent, it would be sort of a check-in. What do people think about this? If there's agreement, then we're going to go ahead and start trying to do the research and the drafting to try to get that put together. So there's a number of just concepts that I think would be just walk through to try to get buy-in, consensus, thoughts. And then there'd be a lot of substantive work that would flow out of that. And so I think that the ethics portion would be sort of, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you think about this? And I'm probably envisioning less in the format of trying to go ahead and invite outside speakers to come in necessarily on it. Let me pause there and sort of see what people think. So let me give you examples of the topics. Lobbyist gift regulations, we already talked about. Lobbyist training requirements, a nepotism concept, prohibition against nepotism, disclosure of bills that a lobbyist is working on or has worked on, gift reporting requirements, etc. In addition, and I don't know if this necessarily has to be an ethics kuleana, but we, maybe sort of in response to both Jim, Sean, and a couple other ones, was actually looking at the House and Senate rules to do two things. One would be is to try to tighten up the conflict of interest provisions, to try to make those have more teeth or emphasis for legislators. And secondly, looking at some type of civility or aloha requirement in dealings with the public and dealing with state employees, et cetera. So that was a long list of topics. Is it okay to start walking through, to have a day scheduled, or we just sort of walk through those, get input, and sort of, know, okay, we got to work on work on language from this.
Sure.
Mhm.
Are there any other speakers we think we should be sort of asking to come on that day to talk?
One question I have, maybe you can answer this, Sandy, because you're at the Ledge all the time. Do we have someone who's recognized as a constitutional scholar on the First Amendment when we're dealing with campaign spending, lobbyists, whatnot? Is there somebody that shows up and testifies that has, it used to be Rick Clifton, but now and it used to be Mark Bennett, but they're both unavailable. So does anybody come to mind, Sandy?
The Ledge, I mean, Gary Cam with campaign spending is there. He's, knowledgeable on campaign spending laws.
So that's your attorney, Kristen?
Yes, but I know as an organization, it's the Attorney General's office that weighs in on constitutional issues. So we usually will defer to them, but you want our.
So we would just ask them and they would kick it to whoever they think is best?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, there really isn't anyone else on campaign spending issues. I mean,
John Van Dyke used to do a fair amount of work. I wonder if there's someone else at the law school who might have some level of interest or expertise at helping.
Probably the best would be Addie.
Bowman?
No, who's the former dean? I'm sorry, that's how old I am. Who's the former dean?
Oster?
Huh?
Sophia?
A.V. Sofer or
Yeah.
Larry?
Avi.
And Van Dyke passed away. Avi took it over, so he's probably the best. So I think at some stage, maybe on that issue, we could invite him.
Or Randy Roth.
Randy is good too. Yeah, I don't know how much on the constitutional issues, more on the ethics issues, but we certainly could invite him.
Campaign spending is unique and constitutional law issues. So
I told you before, Sandy, I litigated one ordinance and had it overturned where it was an issue restricting lobbyists. Judge Chang avoided it because he invalidated the ordinance under preemption, but it was an issue. So it's something we're going to have to look at.
For ethics, I kind of think that the county ethics, like Honolulu, Jan Yamane's shop, and your counterparts in the neighbor islands, I think would be good panelists. I mean,
I can definitely reach out to Jan Yamane. I think the neighbor islands, typically it's now like a corp council who's sort of assigned, which is in of itself an issue, whether or not those are properly funded or robustly administered in of itself is probably an issue.
True, but I think if we're going to generate a final report, if we can be more, inclusive, at least, it's there. And my position has always been, at least in because it's campaign spending, it's, particularly when it comes to even the rules or ethics, a lot of, when it comes to elected officials, they all cross over. So if we can achieve some type of uniformity or something, consistency, I I think that's simpler, but again, that might be just really dreaming large, but.
I do note that our HR number 9, and there may be some wiggle room here, but it does say review and assess existing state laws and rules. And it does have sort of any other applicable laws and rules also kind of listed, but you know, to some extent, you know, on the county side, some of the county changes might not necessarily be within our Kuleana.
True,
not that
but
we
it would
wouldn't
kind of,
invite, not that we wouldn't invite them and encourage their participation.
yeah, because conceptually you share the same, some of the same issues in a,
Mhm.
you know, globally. So anyway, I just think it would be a more, you'd obviously facilitate it and lead it, but I think it'd be good to include them.
Fully agree. Happy to try to coordinate that. Okay, so recognizing that it's probably going to be more of a topic discussion and less of a, you know, defined solutions that are really well vetted, I'd be comfortable with going on June 1st. Just again flagging that this will be more probably conceptual. If we push off later, then we can do a lot more of the background research. But we need a topic to go on June 1st. I'm happy to do it. Sound good? Okay.
So that kind of just leaves July 27th, if OIP/Sunshine, if that's something Sandy and Janet want. I know, you mean. That's that whole section 2, give openness and transparency a boost on the interim report.
Mhm.
No,
Which date again is that? So it's,
huh? What date?
yes. What date?
July 27th.
Okay, sorry.
If we're doing this all before August.
But don't we have June 29th as well? Am I missing that?
That's me. That's campaign finance. So June
You're
1st,
right. I'm sorry.
I have ethics. June 15th, we have elections, presumably. Then June 29th is campaign finance. July 13th is criminal investigation and fraud. And hopefully July 27th will be the Sunshine and OIP or
July 27th.
government records. Is that?
July 27th, yeah. Yeah, that gives us a month, I think, more than a month between voting and elections and this one, July 27th. I was just trying to look at the dates. Sometimes a paper calendar is better than an electronic one. Yeah, Janet, are you game?
Yes, that's fine.
So of course, I'm going to recommend you have Cheryl Kakazu Park, see if she can make that.
We should have Brian Black as well.
Yeah.
Is there an agency that's been, to the extent we're talking about records, that is sort of a prime respondent? I mean, it'd almost be kind of nice to hear from the agency that it handles the requests.
Each agency handles their own requests, and then OIP gives guidance.
Understood. So for example, Department of Health, I think, for example, was getting a lot of requests for President Obama's birth certificate, just as an example. I mean, it'd just be wondering if there's one agency that's been particularly good, particularly useful, just more from a, like, you know, here's what works well kind of perspective. I'm not saying we have to do this, just it was a suggestion. It's maybe.
Oh, like an example of an agency that it does well at responding to public records requests. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you know, maybe has good tools in place, has, is good at responding to requests and sort of talking, working through the issues. Again, recognizing, like more voices isn't always better. Just wondering if it might be useful to have one pragmatic example.
I think it depends on the request also. It's hard to yeah, that's really hard. Like if an agency gets a similar request over and over again, then they could reproduce that response.
But I like Robert's general suggestion. It would be good if we could identify an agency that could talk about the practical problems and, how they've dealt with it. It might be the health department, it might be somebody else.
Yeah, so that's, we could talk about that, Janet, and see if we can identify. I know during COVID, counties and, the State Department of Health were getting a lot of requests, and, they were slowed down for a bit, and then I think they caught up very quickly. So
I think part of this is just recognizing that whatever bill or suggestions that come out have to be heard in the legislature in trying to identify what the concerns are, what the likely opposition points are, and seeing what we can do to try to address them early on. Seems to make sense. So it's just more of a, pragmatically, is it
Right.
the agencies need more money? Like, you're just trying to understand what some of the apprehension is.
So sometimes we work with the Society of Professional Journalists. I may have gotten their title wrong, and they often, not often, but they sometimes complain that, their, requests for documents, can run into the thousands of dollars, or tens of thousands of dollars when it's really for a public good or public interest. And so I could ask some of them to come or one of them to come to talk and just, discuss what their issues are also from the other side.
Yeah. I
Can I
mean,
call you back? Okay, I'll call you back. Oh, just for perspective, I think it was the Department of Health that gives out death certificates. And when my husband passed away, I think I had to get like 30, and they were $10 a piece. So just for perspective, so you know what other agencies are doing.
All right, Barbara, you're on our list.
That's all I know about this particular subject.
So that brings us to, July 27th, to satisfy, Robert, your request to have hit all the subject matters, except the legislative rules one, the process one. Do you want that to be, the next one would be August 10th, would be our 6th meeting. Do you want to discuss that as another topic?
I'd say I raised that because Sandy I'd say kick that down later, deal with the more substantive things, because the change in the rules is basically to implement other decisions we make.
So, yeah, I mean, to be clear, like, one of the things I'm going to be bringing up is the conflict of interest, which is potentially a rule change or potentially a law change. Civility or aloha requirement is potentially a rule change, for example. And so some of the rule stuff might get caught up in other substantive. I do think there's a healthy topic about just the legislative process. So today I had someone recommend, for example, sunshine law apply to legislature. I've heard recommendations on extending the term to sort of allow for more notice, to give the public more opportunity to participate. There's a number of sort of legislative process things that can be talked about. And I think it's a healthy topic of conversation. Just my thought is, I don't know if we have to try to schedule every single topic right now. For example, we may decide that, in August, we may want a catch-up day to try to catch up on some of the topics that we had talked about before. So what I'd suggest is maybe we hold off and schedule anything further with the idea that, come, July, maybe you will set aside a half hour to try to talk about the next couple of meetings. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Sure.
And also down the line, Robert, I was on a number of task force on independent judiciary, and Janet's group played a big role. And one of the areas we always explored was press coverage, access. And so at some stage, again, down the line, we have our, civil beat, our papers, or we have our independent people like Ian Lynn, to basically ask them. So I can tell you one thing that came across very clearly when we discussed this with media people. It wasn't done publicly, but they said the problem is, and I've been around long enough to have seen this, you used to have a court reporter for the Capitol, reporter for the Capitol, reporter for the legislature, reporter for the state court, reporter for the federal court, and Barbara was there. So, these people really got to know their subject, their sources. And now with what's happened in media, they're so limited in terms of their time and their resources. Not to necessarily say that we're going to propose a bill or a resolution, but I would be interested later, we don't schedule it now, on media's view of how to make government more open, transparent, and accessible.
Now, there might be an opportunity actually just to more broadly solicit public input. So maybe after, again, this July, where we sort of invite, generally just picking names out of hat, Randy Roth, Charles Dejoux, if they haven't already talked about one of these things, just to more generally come in with the idea of this is sort of a chance for them to see what we've already done and then sort of maybe give some more direction. A couple different directions we can go. I guess I'm hesitant to start locking too far down the line and then we sort of get stuck into meetings.
This is a good start.
We've got a lot to chew, but really appreciate everybody's willingness to jump in and help facilitate the meetings and get us going. Is this this is the primary thrust of this meeting. Is there anything else people want to throw out there? We do have a other matters section of the agenda to talk about.
Robert, before we go there, I just took a quick look at the interim report, and at the very end where we have some areas of long-term focus, I think for the most part, we covered them in the first 5 meetings, but of course, the Senate and House rules, which we've talked about, but there's one more, which is legislative grants and aid framework and process. Is that something down the road? I just want to make sure we hit what we said we're going to explore.
I didn't submit that particular idea, and I don't understand why it's there.
Oh, okay.
Well, someone submitted it, so why don't we consider it later?
Okay.
I submitted it.
Okay, so
there were concerns raised about the grants and aid process, and having people come to individual legislators to request grants and aid, and giving the inference of quid pro quo, because the grants and aids are not small dollar, and then and it's large money, and then having that money go back into as campaign donations to legislators. And so there were concerns raised about that. Like, why is it that you have to go wait in line to ask for a grant and aid from a legislator? And these are not requests from nonprofits as much as like the Navitech person, Martin Kuo, received grants and aid and also gave hundreds of thousands of dollars to state legislators. And so it's for-profit companies who receive grants and aid. And so it's just looking at that process and
not good. Not good at all.
Using our tax dollars for that process, and going back into their campaign contributions, perhaps, I don't know. So it's looking at the
even nonprofits. There was a legislator who was appointed on finance committee to be in charge of grant and aids, and he got invited to all these big charity banquets and parties, and then he solicited all the big boards of these charities.
So
nothing happened.
So I mean, so that is why that went on that list, because it's cleaning up the standards of conduct and and taking out the quid pro quo aspect of our elections, campaign finance system.
Again, specifically on the legislative grants and aid process and how it's handled, that might sort of fit within a legislative process kind of topic, which again would include like sunshine legislative process, hearing, due notice, and maybe the grants and aid sort of fits within that. It's just, I don't want to call it rule changes because it may not all be rules, but I mean, the idea is it's sort of captured, it's a broad umbrella specifically.
Like, I was told that Honolulu County gives grants and aid money to like a separate agency to administer. So it's administered by an agency versus directly going to a legislator or a council member to ask for funds.
We also baseline funding for Guardian agencies also wasn't captured. So there are definitely a few topics we haven't hit yet. And, we're doing a good stab at getting a good chunk of them, and recognize we'll still have some work to do come August, September, etc. Any other discussions on topics before we sort of move to other matters and then potentially wrap? I'm dangling the closing the meeting out as a incentive here.
Okay, the last thing I'd want to say, Robert, is one, thank you so much for presiding. You did an excellent job. And one thing that's been very helpful to me is that commission members are very free in emailing and sharing their thoughts and getting on the phone. So I hope we continue that not everything has to be done. And the commissioners go out on their own and say, look, let's consider this bill. And just go to talk to people within their community, constituencies, and bring in as much, and that the input shouldn't just be limited to these public meetings.
That's also these public meetings. Thank you for those comments. Public meetings are a great opportunity to make sure the public has an opportunity to give input. And, I think it would be worthwhile for us maybe in the next meeting to try to, do some broad encouragement for people to participate.
Yeah,
because there's probably
and anything that comes to us in that form will end up in a public meeting. It won't be hidden.
Absolutely.
Oh, I have a question about that. Have we had anyone who wanted to testify orally yet?
We have not. And again, obviously this meeting wasn't heavily publicized. I think what I'm suggesting is that the next meeting would have some publicity, get input on. There is an opportunity for people to submit written testimony, which will be part of the record and be visible. And in addition, I think we have indicated people can give oral testimony at the beginning of the meeting. I would suggest, to the extent that we have speakers scheduled, lined up, we may have to have some time constraints on how long like a public speaker can come in, just for the sake of trying to make sure the meetings are still running. But we can also even talk about having one day where it's just reserved for public to come in and just give input, maybe, have more time for them.
Excuse me, I might have missed this, but are we going to meet in person at the Capitol?
So thankfully the House staff have done a wonderful job, and I won't name them by name unless they want to be, but they have indicated that we should be able to have an in-person hybrid meeting. So folks who want to meet in person can, just like how the current committee hearings the legislature runs are both in person and also online. So people can do both.
Great, wonderful. Thank you.
So I'll just comment that as we wrap up this meeting and we all have our dates, if your dates don't work in reaching out to your people, you ask if there are other dates within the lineup of the meeting so that we can try to swap if necessary. That way we don't have to keep going back, you know what I mean? And just stay in communications for purposes of organizationally getting these meetings off. And I guess, as you have asked, Robert, that we all start drafting our agendas, if you will, to circulate so that we're on the same page as to the content, as to what will be covered, and the panelists, because that might jog some other, ideas. I know in campaign spending, similar to what you said, Robert, it's a lot of ideas that rather than actual bills. Because similarly, this is not a package of bills that formally my commissioners have ruled upon, but it's certainly a temperature check as to where we are with the public and of course this multifaceted commission. So just making sure I'm okay with your takeaways from this meeting, so I know what to do and your expectations of me for the next meeting.
Oh,
No, thank you for summarizing very, very well. I do heartily agree that I think the sooner we start trying to draft agendas and line speakers up and make sure the dates work, the better off we are. Also recognizing that the House who's been supporting this, we have to make sure we've lined up rooms and, reserve the equipment and have the staff available to help. So the sooner we can confirm everything and have it locked in, the better off we all are. Janet, sorry, you had a comment?
well, I'm just wondering what we're shooting for as far as the length of the presentations. All of the resource people will ask us this. Is it 15 to 20 minutes or from each of them?
I think it's going to depend on the topic. It's going to depend on what they're going to say. I think we'd be sort of erring with the facilitator to kind of work and coordinate with those people to sort of come back to us and make a proposal with, my ask that we be as ruthless as we can on time. I guess we just don't want necessarily someone to come and present for 2 hours and then we've had a nice 2-hour discussion. I think the hope is that we're walking out with sort of concrete solutions, ideas, proposals that we can work on that we think are been sort of well vetted and balanced. I know that was complete non-answer, Janet.
That's all right. We'll move along.
I would be thinking like, an hour of like presentations with questions. And then, and then an hour discussion amongst ourselves as to what we thought. Because not every, I know we have 2.5 hours, but that's actually quite a long meeting. So, and then, just something like
you're going to be in the best position to know that some speaker is just particularly insightful, has a lot of information, and maybe needs more time. So I think it's just a matter of trying to evaluate what they're bringing to the table and how much time is needed.
Yeah, I think it's kind of early even at this point to ask for bills from folks. I don't know.
Well, I appreciate the format because I think, we only have 14 meetings, like you said, and we still have to write this thing, that we do just make some decisions. It's not just a discussion of ideas. We do have some takeaways from it. And I think it's a fluid thing, but I can envision either the commission or the public having follow-up questions for me that perhaps at the beginning of each subsequent meeting, we agendize follow-up from the last meeting or something, just so it keeps moving. And at least we're accountable to whatever questions were posed, including I don't have the answer for that. or here's your answer, or a good idea, let's discuss further, just so we keep it moving.
Agreed. Thank you, Kristen, for that summary. I think it's also part of the reason why we're only scheduling, these topics and leaving some time to maybe try to do some catch up if we have to.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other matters folks want to bring up? If not, I think we can adjourn.
So our next meeting would be June 1st. And it may be in person or at least a hybrid. We'll see. Got it. Okay. As always, a pleasure with you guys.
Great seeing everybody.
Thank you.
Happy Easter.
Oh, thank you.